Let me ask you something. What would you do if the person you trusted most, the one you thought would protect you, left you alone in the street, in the rain, carrying their child inside you? Can you imagine that? Can you feel that sting in your chest right now? This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when fate itself decides to step in. A millionaire, powerful and cold, thought he could throw away the woman who loved him most. But life doesn't let cruelty go unpaid, does it? I want you to stay with me because the story you're about to hear isn't just drama, it's a mirror. Maybe you've been hurt, maybe you've been abandoned, maybe you know what it feels like to stand in the middle of a storm and wonder if you'll ever see the sun again. If that's you, then trust me, you are not here by accident. And before we dive in, my friends, I need to ask you one more thing. If this story touches your heart, if it makes you think of someone who needs hope right now, please hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel. Because together, we're not just watching stories, we're healing through them. Now, are you ready to see what happens when fate takes its revenge? The night was colder than anyone expected for early spring. The city streets glistened with a thin film of rain, streetlights flickering against the wet pavement like broken stars. On one of those streets, where taxis sped recklessly and pedestrians hurried home, a scene unfolded that no one could have predicted. A young woman, visibly pregnant, was standing alone, trembling, her hands clutching her swollen belly. Her name was Elena. She had just been abandoned by the man she believed was her protector, her husband, the father of her unborn child. That man was Marcus Hale, a self-made millionaire known for his ruthless business moves and impeccable tailored suits. Tonight, however, his ruthlessness had reached its cruelest form yet. After a heated argument in the back seat of his luxury black Mercedes, he shoved the door open and ordered Elena to get out. She begged him, her voice cracking with desperation. "Marcus, please, I have nowhere to go. The baby." But his eyes were as cold as steel. "You'll figure it out. You always do," he muttered, before slamming the car door and speeding away into the night. His taillights disappeared down the slick avenue, leaving her stranded in a world that suddenly felt merciless. Elena staggered, her shoes slipping on the wet pavement, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and disbelief. She wrapped her coat tighter around her body, though the fabric was thin and hardly enough to shield her from the chill. The city that once promised dreams now mocked her with its neon signs and honking horns. She wasn't just a wife anymore, she was an abandoned soul carrying a fragile life inside her. Passers-by glanced but didn't stop. Some whispered, others shook their heads. To them, she was just another struggling woman on the edge of collapse. No one knew her story. No one knew she had once lived in a penthouse where marble floors gleamed and crystal chandeliers sparkled, where she believed love had wrapped her like a blanket. The rain intensified. Elena tried to cross the street, her vision blurred by tears. Her mind screamed, don't fall, protect the baby." Each step felt heavier than the last. Her body trembled, her breath shallow, her heart racing with panic. Then it happened. Tires screeched, headlights flared, and a car came hurtling toward her. Time slowed. She raised her hands instinctively, as if to shield her unborn child. A scream tore through the air, her own, and then the violent thud echoed across the street. The world spun into chaos. When she opened her eyes, the cold ground met her cheek. Pain seared through her side. People rushed toward her now, their gasps and shouts piercing the night. Someone shouted to call an ambulance. Another draped a coat over her trembling body. She could barely whisper, her lips trembling, "My baby, please, my baby." As sirens wailed in the distance, fate carved its first line into Marcus Hale's downfall. He didn't know that abandoning Elena wasn't just an act of cruelty. It was the moment destiny chose to turn against him. For while Elena lay on the pavement fighting for her life, a chain of events had already been set into motion. And what Marcus didn't know, what he could never imagine, was that Elena was far from powerless. Beneath her fragile exterior, beneath the pain and betrayal, there was a secret, one that would soon rise like a storm. That secret would not only change her life, but would destroy his world forever. And when the ambulance doors closed on that rainy night, it wasn't just Elena's survival that was at stake. It was the beginning of Marcus Hale's reckoning. Elena Martinez had not always lived in glittering penthouses or walked through marble hallways. Before Marcus Hale entered her life, she had been just another woman in the bustling city, working long shifts at a small community library. She was 25 then, with warm brown eyes and hair that curled softly around her shoulders. Her beauty wasn't loud or extravagant, it was quiet, the kind that lingered in memory like a familiar melody. She grew up in a modest neighborhood on the south side of the city. Her parents, immigrants from Mexico, had raised her on values of hard work and humility. They didn't have much money, but they had love, and that love became the foundation of Elena's strength. She learned early how to make do with little, how to stretch meals, how to share hand-me-down clothes, how to smile even when life felt heavy. Her father worked construction until his back gave out, and her mother cleaned offices at night. Elena often helped her mother mop floors after school, carrying her books in one hand and a bucket in the other. She never complained. Instead, she dreamed of becoming a teacher, someone who could inspire children the way her parents inspired her. But dreams have a way of bending when life throws unexpected storms. By the time she was in college, juggling part-time jobs and classes, her mother fell gravely ill. Cancer. The medical bills piled up higher than Elena's paychecks, and eventually she had to put her studies on hold. She took care of her mother until the very end, holding her hand through the pain, whispering prayers into the silence. When her mother passed away, Elena felt as though part of her soul had been torn away. Her father, broken with grief, sank deeper into his own silence, leaving Elena to carry the weight of survival alone. She found herself working at the library full-time, shelving books by day, tutoring children by night, barely making rent. Life was tough, but she held on. Because that's what her mother had taught her, to keep walking even when the road seemed endless. Then Marcus appeared. He came into the library one afternoon, tall, confident, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He wasn't there for books. He was there for a meeting with a city councilman who had insisted on using the library's private reading room for some political discussion. Elena had been the one to guide Marcus there, her hands slightly trembling as she noticed his piercing blue eyes and the way he carried himself like the world belonged to him. To her surprise, Marcus noticed her. "Do you work here every day?" he had asked, his voice smooth like polished steel. She nodded shyly. He smiled, and that smile became the beginning of a whirlwind she could never have imagined. In the weeks that followed, Marcus returned to the library, not for politics, not for business, but for her. He charmed her with flowers, took her to dinner she couldn't have afforded in her wildest dreams, and listened when she talked about her parents and her childhood. He seemed so different from the cold world of wealth he came from. With him, she felt seen. She felt chosen. 6 months later, they were married in a quiet civil ceremony. Elena thought she had stepped into a fairy tale. From her modest apartment, she moved into Marcus's luxury penthouse with panoramic views of the city. She went from counting pennies for groceries to shopping in boutiques where price tags didn't matter. Yet, despite the glittering world around her, Elena never forgot who she was. She still cooked simple meals, still called her father every week, still found comfort in the smell of old books. But Marcus began to change. At first, he was tender, protective, but as his business empire grew, so did his arrogance. He began to criticize her for being too quiet, too plain, too unambitious. "You don't fit into my world," he told her one night after a gala, where she had worn a modest dress she thought was elegant enough. His words pierced her heart like shards of glass. Still, Elena held on. When she discovered she was pregnant, her heart soared with hope. She thought the baby would bring them closer. She imagined Marcus holding their child, imagined their fractured love being mended by the tiny heartbeat growing inside her. For a moment, Marcus seemed happy, even proud. He promised to take care of her, promised they would be a family. But promises are fragile in the hands of a man who worships money more than love. As her belly grew, so did the distance between them. Marcus spent more nights at business meetings and more weekends traveling. Elena tried to ignore the rumors she overheard, the whispers of a young woman Marcus was seen with at exclusive restaurants, the perfume lingering on his suits that wasn't hers. She convinced herself it was stress, that he would come back to her once the baby arrived. Then came the night that shattered her world. After another argument, this time about her burdening him with doctor's appointments and medical bills, Marcus ordered the driver to stop the car in the middle of a busy street. Elena begged him, tears streaming down her face, her hands gripping her belly. But he had already grown tired of her. In his mind, she was no longer the beautiful woman he once courted. She was a weight, a reminder of responsibility he didn't want. And so he left her there, in the rain, as if she were nothing more than a forgotten chapter in his story. That was who Elena was when the car struck her. A woman abandoned, heartbroken, vulnerable. But beneath her fragile frame burned a fire she didn't yet know existed. Life had already taught her to survive storms. And this storm, this betrayal, would not break her forever. Because while Marcus thought he had discarded her like trash, fate was quietly preparing her for a resurrection that would shake his empire to its core. And as she lay in the hospital bed that night, weak but breathing, Elena whispered to her unborn child, "We will rise again." The sterile white of the hospital room glowed under fluorescent lights, buzzing faintly like the sound of trapped bees. Elena lay there, her body bruised, her spirit fractured, but her hands never left her stomach. Machines beeped steadily, monitoring both her heartbeat and that of the child she carried. Every time the soft rhythm echoed through the room, she clung to it like a lifeline. The hospital wasn't private or exclusive. It was a public one, crowded with patients and the faint smell of disinfectant lingering in every hallway. Nurses rushed past, their shoes squeaking against the linoleum floors, voices blending into a constant hum of urgency. Elena's bed was by a cracked window, the blinds rattling whenever the wind pushed against the glass. The blanket was thin, barely enough to shield her from the draft, and the water pitcher at her bedside had gone lukewarm. This was her reality now, a reality of survival. Meanwhile, just a few miles across the city, another scene played out, one that stood in brutal contrast. Inside the Crystal Tower, a skyscraper Marcus Hale had purchased last year, the top floor glowed like a palace suspended above the clouds. A grand gala was unfolding. Chandeliers, each worth more than a family's yearly income, spilled golden light across marble floors. Waiters in pressed tuxedos glided like dancers balancing silver trays of champagne. The city's elite, politicians, tech moguls, and celebrity investors, moved in a whirl of sequins and silk, their laughter echoing across the cavernous hall. At the center of it all was Marcus. He wore a custom black suit, tailored to perfection, the fabric shimmering under the lights. On his arm wasn't Elena, the wife who lay in a hospital bed clinging to life. No. He appeared with Vanessa Moore, a socialite barely out of her 20s, draped in a gown of scarlet satin. Cameras flashed as Marcus whispered something into her ear, making her laugh, her hand brushing possessively against his chest. No one in that glittering room questioned Elena's absence. In Marcus's world, appearances mattered more than truth. He smiled for photographs, raised his glass during toasts, and announced a new real estate venture worth hundreds of millions. To the crowd, he was untouchable, a man of vision, power, and endless charm. Yet outside those glass walls, fate had begun drawing its own picture, one that glitter couldn't hide. Back at the hospital, Elena's father sat beside her bed. His once strong hands, now rough and weathered from years of labor, trembled as he touched her arm. "Mija," he whispered in Spanish, his voice breaking. "You will not go through this alone. Your mother would want you to fight." Tears slipped from Elena's closed eyes. She wanted to answer, to promise she would rise, but her throat was too raw, her body too weak. Instead, she pressed his hand against her belly. The baby kicked softly, as if answering for her. Her world had narrowed to this small room, this fragile hope. But even in her brokenness, a spark was being lit. The starkness of the hospital, the kindness of strangers who rushed to her aid, the quiet strength of her father, all of it carved into her heart, a truth she would later use as a weapon. She had survived the street, the betrayal, and the impact of a car. She could survive anything. The city outside seemed almost cruel in its indifference. Neon lights blinked, billboards advertised luxury goods, and taxis honked impatiently. Life went on, as if Elena's suffering was invisible. But in Marcus's tower, the music grew louder. Guests clinked glasses, applauding him as he declared, "Hale Enterprises will reshape this city's skyline." His voice boomed with pride, echoing off the crystal walls. Vanessa kissed his cheek for the cameras, her scarlet lips leaving a faint mark that made whispers ripple through the crowd. To him, Elena was already erased. Yet destiny has a way of weaving threads unseen by men like Marcus. While he basked in temporary glory, his abandoned wife was being watched over by forces he underestimated. Her father's devotion, the resilience of her unborn child, and the quiet power of survival. The two settings, the fragile hospital room and the glittering tower, were not just backdrops, they were symbols. One showed the cruelty of a man who had forgotten love, the other the strength of a woman who had nothing left but the will to endure. And in stories like these, it is never the chandeliers or champagne that last. It is the fire born in suffering that eventually lights the darkest halls. Elena didn't know it yet, but the hospital would not only be the place where she clung to life. It would be the ground where her rebirth began. And while Marcus raised his glass to a future built on lies, fate was already pouring the first cracks into his empire. Cracks that Elena herself would one day turn into an earthquake. Marcus Hale's rise to power was the kind of story people loved to tell at cocktail parties. He wasn't born into wealth. He clawed his way up from nothing, using ambition like a blade and charm like a shield. In his early 20s, he worked as a real estate broker, hustling deals others thought impossible. By 30, he had leveraged enough contacts and cunning to buy his first skyscraper. By 35, his name was whispered with both envy and fear in the boardrooms of New York. But success has a way of sharpening the worst edges of a man. Marcus had built his empire on risk, but the higher he climbed, the less human he became. To his employees, he was a god in a tailored suit, a man whose approval meant career advancement and whose disfavor meant instant exile. To the media, he was the shark of the skyline, ruthless yet captivating. To Elena, however, he was supposed to be something different. He was supposed to be a husband, a protector, a father. Instead, he became her destroyer. Vanessa Moore entered Marcus's life like a spark on gasoline. She was 26, a former model turned influencer with millions of followers who adored her curated life of red carpets and luxury vacations. She was beautiful in a way that demanded attention, icy blonde hair, piercing green eyes, and a figure sculpted to perfection. But beneath the glamour was ambition sharper than any blade. Marcus first met her at a private gala hosted by one of his investors. Elena had been invited too, but she was already several months pregnant, feeling tired and insecure in her modest gown. That night, she stayed home, believing Marcus's claim that it would be strictly business. But it was anything but. Vanessa was there, draped in a gown of midnight blue that shimmered with every step. She laughed at Marcus's jokes, touched his arm just long enough to send a message, and leaned close when the cameras flashed. By the end of the evening, whispers spread like wildfire. Marcus Hale had found himself a new companion. For Marcus, Vanessa represented everything Elena didn't. She was glamorous, ambitious, hungry for power. She fit perfectly into the image he wanted the world to see, the unstoppable tycoon with the perfect woman on his arm. Elena's simplicity, her kindness, her quiet strength, qualities that once charmed him, now seemed like weaknesses in his distorted eyes. At first, Marcus tried to live in two worlds. He came home to Elena, offering her empty promises and half-hearted affection, while spending nights in penthouse suites with Vanessa. But secrets don't stay hidden for long. Elena began noticing the signs: lipstick stains on his shirts, the faint scent of another woman's perfume, his constant excuses about late meetings. When she confronted him, Marcus didn't deny it. Instead, he turned the blame on her. "You've let yourself go," he snapped one evening, ignoring the fact that she was carrying his child. "You don't understand my world, Elena. You never did. Vanessa gets it. She belongs beside me. You just drag me down." Those words cut deeper than any blade. And yet, Elena stayed, hoping the baby would remind him of who he used to be. She prayed that the man she once loved still existed somewhere beneath the arrogance. But Marcus wasn't looking back. He was intoxicated by power and Vanessa's adoration. Together, they became the couple everyone gossiped about, the ruthless millionaire and the glamorous socialite. Tabloids splashed their photos across covers, while Elena's existence was erased from Marcus's narrative. The cruelty didn't stop there. Marcus began to humiliate Elena in subtle ways. He criticized her appearance in front of others, ignored her at events, and eventually stopped bringing her altogether. When she tried to talk about the baby's future, he brushed her off, saying, "Don't worry about it. I'll handle everything." But what he meant wasn't protection. It was control. He saw Elena not as a partner, but as a burden. Vanessa fueled his arrogance. She whispered poison into his ear, mocking Elena behind closed doors. "She looks like a charity case," Vanessa sneered one night after spotting Elena at a cafe. "She doesn't fit your world, Marcus. People laugh at you when you show up with her." Marcus laughed too, though deep down, some part of him knew the truth. Elena was worth more than Vanessa could ever be. But he had already chosen the glitter over the gold. That choice reached its peak the night he abandoned Elena on the street. Vanessa had been pressuring him, demanding he prove his loyalty. "If you're really mine," she said, her green eyes flashing, "then cut ties. Completely. No more wife, no more sympathy act. Choose me or lose me." Marcus, blinded by lust and pride, chose her. He shoved Elena out of the car that rainy night, leaving her broken in the street. And as he sped away toward Vanessa's waiting arms, he didn't look back. To the world, Marcus Hale was untouchable. To himself, he was invincible. But fate does not forget cruelty. For every toast he raised at glittering galas, for every photo he staged with Vanessa on his arm, a storm brewed in silence. Elena's suffering had been seen, not just by strangers on the street that night, but by destiny itself. And destiny has no mercy for men who discard love for vanity. Because while Marcus and Vanessa celebrated their shallow empire, Elena's quiet strength was about to become the weapon that would destroy them both. 2 weeks had passed since the night Marcus left Elena bleeding on the street. Though the hospital stitched her body back together, her spirit still bore open wounds. She tried to focus on her baby, telling herself every day that she had to survive for the tiny heartbeat inside her. But survival was never easy when humiliation trailed her like a shadow. News of Marcus's relationship with Vanessa had spread quickly, the tabloids ravenous for every photo. There he was, smiling beside his glamorous mistress, attending charity galas as though nothing had happened. In glossy magazines, Vanessa glowed in designer gowns, while Marcus boasted about his expanding empire. Not once did he acknowledge Elena, his wife, his unborn child, or the pain he had inflicted. To the public eye, she didn't exist. But humiliation has a cruel way of making itself seen. One gray afternoon, Elena received a phone call from her father. His voice shook. "Mija, they're talking about you on the television. About Marcus. About the baby." Her heart froze. She turned on the small hospital TV, and there it was, a press conference held in the Crystal Tower lobby. Marcus stood at the podium, Vanessa at his side, cameras flashing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice dripping with polished arrogance, "I want to clarify recent rumors. My relationship with Vanessa is not new. It is strong, committed, and real. As for the other stories circulating..." He paused dramatically, flashing his perfect smile. "Let me assure you, I am not responsible for anyone else's choices or circumstances. Some people cling to the past, but I choose the future." Vanessa leaned in, kissed his cheek, and the crowd erupted in applause. Elena's knees buckled. She clutched her stomach, her baby kicking in response to her racing heartbeat. The words rang in her ears like thunder. Not responsible. Clinging to the past. He had reduced her entire existence, her marriage, her child, her pain, to a disposable rumor. But fate wasn't done with her humiliation. 3 nights later, Elena decided to leave the hospital for a short walk. She wore a loose coat, her hair tied back, hoping to breathe fresh air away from the suffocating smell of disinfectant. As she stepped outside, she noticed flashing lights at the nearby hotel. A crowd had gathered, cheering, cameras raised. Against her better judgment, Elena drew closer. And there they were, Marcus and Vanessa, stepping out of a limousine, dazzling under the paparazzi's glare. He wore a tuxedo, she shimmered in gold silk. The event was the annual Metropolitan Charity Ball, one Elena had attended with Marcus the previous year. Back then, she had stood proudly at his side, believing in their love. Now she was a ghost among strangers, watching from the sidewalk. Reporters shouted questions. "Marcus, any comments on your wife's condition?" Marcus didn't flinch. He tightened his grip on Vanessa's hand, pulling her closer. "Elena is no longer part of my life," he declared, his voice amplified through microphones. "I wish her well, but my future is with Vanessa." The words landed like knives. Gasps rippled through the crowd, some reporters exchanging shocked glances. But Marcus didn't stop. He looked straight at the cameras and added, "I will not be held hostage by the past." Vanessa smirked, her arms sliding around his waist like a queen claiming her throne. Elena's vision blurred with tears. The humiliation was complete. Not only had he abandoned her, but now he erased her publicly, as if she and the baby were stains to be scrubbed from his perfect image. Strangers whispered around her. Some pointed, recognizing her fragile figure in the shadows. "That's her," someone murmured. "The wife, the pregnant one he left." Her cheeks burned. She turned away, stumbling into the dark street, her breath shallow, her chest tightening. The voices followed her, mocking, pitying, cruel. She had never felt so small, so invisible, so utterly destroyed. That night, back in her hospital bed, Elena wept until dawn. She pressed her hand against her belly and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought your father would love us. I thought." Her words broke into sobs. She felt powerless, shattered beyond repair. For the first time, Elena considered giving up, not on her life, but on her fight. The weight of shame pressed down like chains. What was the point of resisting when Marcus controlled everything? The money, the media, the narrative? But fate has a strange way of finding cracks in despair. The very next morning, a nurse brought in a newspaper someone had left in the waiting room. Elena didn't want to look, but her father insisted. "Read this, Hija. Just read." There, on the front page, was a single photograph. Marcus smirking at the gala, Vanessa clinging to him like a trophy. But beside it was another picture. Elena, pale and bruised, being carried into an ambulance the night of the accident. A bystander had snapped it, and now it had surfaced. The headline screamed, "Millionaire's pregnant wife abandoned, hit by car hours before he appears with mistress." The article painted a different story than Marcus's polished lies. It described witnesses who had seen him push Elena from his car, leaving her on the rain-slicked street. It quoted doctors speaking anonymously about her condition, about how both mother and child had been in critical danger. Suddenly, Marcus's perfect image had cracks, and the world began to ask questions. For Elena, it was a double-edged blade. She hated the pity, hated being splashed across tabloids as the tragic wife. But for the first time, she wasn't invisible. The truth, or at least part of it, was out, and that truth would become the seed of something greater. Because humiliation, when endured too long, stops being a wound, it becomes fuel. And Elena, though still fragile, was beginning to burn. And as Marcus and Vanessa laughed at their own reflection in a golden mirror that night, they didn't know the woman they had discarded was already rising from the ashes, ready to turn her shame into fire. Elena had always believed she was strong. She survived her mother's illness, her father's silence, the endless days of working 2 jobs just to stay afloat. But nothing had prepared her for this. The humiliation replayed in her mind like a cruel film. Marcus's words at the gala, "I will not be held hostage by the past," echoed louder than the applause that followed. The sight of Vanessa smirking beside him haunted her dreams. And the whispers of strangers on the sidewalk, "That's her, the wife, the pregnant one he left," stabbed deeper than any knife. She tried to eat, but food turned to ash in her mouth. She tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw headlights, heard tires screeching, felt the thud of her body hitting the street. She jolted awake, drenched in sweat, her hands trembling as she clutched her belly. Her father stayed by her side, sleeping in a chair beside her hospital bed. He tried to be strong, but even he couldn't hide the sorrow in his eyes. One night, she overheard him praying softly in Spanish. "Dios mío, give her strength. Don't let my daughter break." But Elena was breaking. The doctors advised her to avoid stress, but how could she when her entire world had collapsed? Her marriage was gone, her reputation shredded, her body fragile. She was 6 months pregnant, alone and powerless against the man who once vowed to love her. One evening, as rain tapped against the hospital window, Elena reached her lowest point. She sat upright in bed, staring at her reflection in the darkened glass. The woman staring back was unrecognizable. Pale, hollow-eyed, her hair limp around her face, she looked like a ghost. A whisper slipped from her lips. Maybe Marcus was right. The thought horrified her. but it sank deeper with each passing second. Maybe she was too weak. Maybe she didn't belong in his world of glitter and power. Maybe her child would be better off without her dragging them through a life of shame. Tears streamed down her face. She pressed her palm to her belly and whispered, "I don't know if I can do this." The baby kicked in response, as if protesting her words. She gasped, covering her mouth, sobs shaking her fragile body. That tiny movement, so small yet so alive, pulled her back from the edge, if only slightly. Still, the darkness clung to her like a suffocating blanket. The following days blurred. Nurses checked her vitals, her father tried to feed her, but Elena drifted through it all like a shadow. Depression wrapped its claws around her, whispering lies that she was worthless, that Marcus had been justified, that she was nothing but a burden. Then came the night she almost gave up. Her father had stepped out to get coffee, leaving her alone. The hospital room was silent, the only sound the steady beep of the monitor. Elena stared at the IV in her arm, at the window open just a crack to let in the cold night air. For the first time, she considered ending the pain altogether. A single thought consumed her. If I disappear, maybe the baby won't have to suffer. She slid her feet to the floor, trembling, her breath shallow. But as she stood, the baby kicked again, harder this time. She froze. Another kick, and another. Tears flooded her eyes as she clutched her stomach. "No," she whispered. "No, I can't. You need me." Collapsing back onto the bed, she sobbed uncontrollably, rocking herself as though trying to cradle the life inside her. She realized then that despair had nearly stolen everything. Not just her life, but her child's chance to know a mother's love. Her father returned moments later, his coffee spilling as he rushed to her side. "Elena, Dios mío, what happened?" She shook her head, unable to speak. But in her eyes, he saw both the darkness she had battled and the fragile spark that still remained. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like he hadn't since she was a little girl. "Listen to me," he said fiercely, his voice breaking. "You are not weak. You are my daughter. You are your mother's daughter. You will rise. Do you hear me?" His words pierced the fog. For the first time in weeks, Elena clung to something other than despair. Her father's faith in her, the baby's tiny kicks, the memory of her mother's strength. But recovery was not instant. The days ahead were still heavy, filled with tears and nightmares. She struggled to eat, struggled to smile, yet slowly, painfully, a shift began. Each time her baby moved, she reminded herself, "I'm still needed." Each time her father held her hand, she remembered, "I'm not alone." And then came the letter. One morning, a nurse handed her an envelope. "This came for you," she said gently. The paper was thick, expensive, the handwriting elegant. Inside was a single note. "Mrs. Hale, the world has seen your suffering, but you are not invisible. You have allies you don't yet know. When you are ready, contact the number below. Your future does not end here." No signature, just a phone number. Elena's heart pounded as she read the words over and over. Who had sent it? A journalist? A stranger? Someone from Marcus's world who secretly despised him? She didn't know. But for the first time since her collapse, she felt something other than despair. She felt curiosity. The darkness hadn't vanished, but a door had opened, just a crack. And sometimes a crack is all it takes for light to flood in. And as Elena held the letter in her trembling hands, she didn't realize she was holding the first key to her transformation, the first step in turning her pain into power. The mysterious letter lay on Elena's lap, its edges slightly crumpled from the way her trembling fingers had clutched it through the night. She had read it over and over, each word digging into her soul like a seed waiting to grow. You are not invisible. You have allies you don't yet know. Contact the number below. At first, she thought it was a cruel joke, another reminder of her shattered life. But something about the handwriting, the weight of the paper, the confidence in the words, told her it was real. It wasn't pity, it was a promise. Her father urged caution. "Mija, people can be dangerous. Don't trust so quickly." But Elena felt something stir inside her, a spark of curiosity, maybe even hope. For weeks she had been drowning in despair, invisible in Marcus's glittering shadow. And now, someone was telling her she wasn't alone. That evening, when her father had gone home to rest, Elena picked up the hospital phone. Her hand shook as she dialed the number. 1 ring. 2. 3. Then a deep, calm voice answered. "Mrs. Hale?" She froze. "Who is this?" I represent people who have been watching your husband, the voice said. Powerful people. He believes himself untouchable, but his arrogance has made him enemies, and now he has made himself vulnerable by what he did to you. Elena's breath caught. Why would anyone care about me? Because, the voice replied firmly, you are the key to his undoing. Before she could respond, the man continued. We know who you really are, Elena Martinez Hale. You are not just a discarded wife. You are the rightful heir to property your husband tried to bury. Land, investments. Your name is still on the documents. He thinks you don't know, but we do. And if you are willing, we will help you reclaim what is yours. Elena's head spun. She had never cared about money, never looked at Marcus's contracts or asked about his business. She thought she had nothing, that she was penniless without him. But now, this stranger was telling her Marcus had built part of his empire on assets connected to her. Who are you? She whispered again. There was a pause. Then, an old friend of your mother. Her heart stopped. My mother? Yes, she may be gone, but the legacy she left you is not. Marcus has tried to erase it, but he can't. Not unless you let him. The line went silent. Then it clicked dead. Elena sat frozen, the receiver pressed against her ear long after the call ended. An old friend of her mother. A hidden legacy. Documents with her name. It was too much to believe, and yet, something deep in her soul told her it was true. Her mother had always whispered to her, you are stronger than you know. Maybe this was what she meant. The next morning, Elena found an envelope slipped under her hospital door. Inside were copies of legal documents, property deeds, stock certificates, accounts with her signature. Proof. Marcus had hidden them, funneled them into his empire, but they still tied back to her. Her father's eyes widened as he read. Hija, do you understand what this means? He cannot erase you. By law, you own part of what he claims as his. The weight of despair began to lift, replaced by something unfamiliar. Power. For the first time, Elena realized she wasn't as helpless as Marcus wanted her to believe. He had discarded her like trash, but he had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated her. And she wasn't alone. The following week, she was released from the hospital. She moved into her father's modest home, far from the glitter of Marcus's penthouse. The neighborhood smelled of fresh bread from the corner bakery. Children's laughter echoed through narrow streets, and the nights were quiet. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe, and it gave her space to heal. But Elena was no longer content with survival. She wanted justice. With the help of the anonymous contact, who later introduced himself as Gabriel, her mother's former lawyer, Elena began piecing together the truth. Gabriel revealed that her mother had once owned significant property shares before marrying her father. Investments Marcus had quietly seized through their marriage. Your mother trusted me, Gabriel told her during their first meeting. And now I will honor her by protecting you. Elena felt tears sting her eyes. For so long she believed Marcus had all the power, that she was nothing but a shadow of his empire. But here, in dusty folders and signed documents, was proof that she still had a voice. Her breakdown had left her fragile, but now she felt something different rising inside her. Steel. She began to change. No more hospital gowns, no more hiding behind fear. She started wearing clothes that reminded her of her strength. Simple but elegant dresses, her mother's old jewelry, polished and gleaming, shoes that clicked with confidence against the pavement. She carried herself taller, her hands often resting protectively on her belly, as though to say, we are still here. We will not be erased. And slowly, whispers began to spread in the city. Reporters caught sight of her leaving Gabriel's office. Paparazzi snapped photos of her walking through the courthouse steps with her father at her side. Headlines shifted from "Millionaire's mistress triumphs" to "Abandoned wife fights back." Marcus laughed when he first heard. She's weak, he told Vanessa over champagne in their penthouse. Let her try. She has nothing. But beneath his arrogance, a flicker of unease began to grow. Because Marcus knew better than anyone, Elena's name was on those documents. And if she chose to fight, she could unravel everything he had built. The tables were turning. Elena was no longer just the humiliated wife. She was the woman Marcus had underestimated. And now, with the truth in her hands, she was ready to transform despair into vengeance. And as Marcus toasted his own reflection in a glass of brandy that night, he had no idea that his greatest downfall had already begun. in the quiet determination of the woman he left for dead. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Elena had ever known. For the first time since Marcus abandoned her, she woke each day not in despair but with purpose. With Gabriel's guidance and her father's quiet strength at her side, she began preparing for a battle she never thought she'd fight. The transformation started small. She cut her hair, the limp strands replaced by a bold, confident style. She wore tailored dresses that hugged her figure proudly, showing the world that pregnancy was not weakness but power. No longer did she walk with downcast eyes. Her steps carried intention, her shoulders squared, her gaze steady. The press noticed. Headlines shifted again. Elena Martinez Hale returns stronger than ever. Photos of her stepping out of courtrooms, her hand protectively over her baby bump, flooded tabloids. For once, she wasn't painted as the victim. She was the fighter, the survivor. But Marcus still believed she was no threat. "She's making noise, that's all," he scoffed to Vanessa one evening as they lounged in their penthouse. "Let her talk to reporters. None of it matters. I own the board. I own the judges. She can't touch me." Vanessa smirked, swirling wine in her glass. "Then why do you look worried, Marcus?" He ignored her, but deep inside, fear gnawed at him. He remembered the documents with Elena's name, the whispers among his investors, the way certain partners had grown hesitant since the scandal broke. For the first time, cracks appeared in his empire. The turning point came at the annual Skyline Gala, a night meant to celebrate Marcus's latest multi-billion-dollar development project. It was his crowning glory, his chance to show the city he was still untouchable. Politicians, CEOs, and celebrities filled the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers raining golden light on polished marble floors. Marcus arrived with Vanessa on his arm, smug as ever. But fate had prepared a different performance. As the orchestra played and the crowd mingled, the heavy doors of the ballroom swung open. Conversations hushed. Heads turned. And there she was, Elena. She walked into the room like a storm disguised as grace. Her gown was midnight blue, flowing elegantly over her rounded belly, the diamonds at her neck catching every glint of light. At her side was Gabriel, dignified and commanding, his presence unmistakable. And just behind them, two of Marcus's former investors, men once loyal to him, now aligned with her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Elena's entrance was not just unexpected, it was electric. Marcus's face drained of color. "What the hell is she doing here?" he muttered under his breath, his grip on Vanessa tightening. Elena didn't look at him. She walked with calm authority, greeting guests who had once ignored her. Some reached for her hands, others whispered support. For the first time, Marcus wasn't the star of the evening. She was. The climax came when the host invited Marcus to the stage to deliver his speech. He straightened his jacket, forced a smile, and strode forward. But before he could begin, Elena stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear, steady. "I have something to say." The crowd shifted, eager, sensing scandal. Marcus hissed, "Sit down, Elena. This isn't your place." She turned to him, her eyes blazing. "It was never my place, was it, Marcus? You made sure of that, but tonight it is." The host, sensing drama too irresistible to ignore, handed her the microphone. The room fell silent. Elena raised her chin. "2 months ago, this man abandoned me on the street while I was carrying his child. Hours later, I was struck by a car and nearly lost my life. While I lay bleeding, he appeared with his mistress, smiling for cameras, pretending I did not exist. But I am here. I survived, and I will not be erased." Gasps erupted, whispers spreading like wildfire. Marcus's jaw clenched, his smile frozen in place. Elena continued, her voice unwavering. "This empire he boasts about, these towers, these deals, he did not build them alone. Documents prove that part of what he owns still belongs to me, through my family's legacy. He thought I was too weak to fight, but he was wrong." With that, Gabriel stepped forward, holding up a folder thick with papers. "Here is the evidence," he announced. "Contracts, deeds, investments, all signed in Elena's name. Marcus Hale has been profiting off assets he tried to bury, and the law will no longer allow it." The ballroom erupted in chaos. Reporters shouting, cameras flashing, guests whispering in shock. Investors pulled out phones, murmuring about pulling their funds. Politicians exchanged uneasy glances. Marcus tried to speak, his voice desperate. "This is nonsense. She's lying. She's nothing without me." But his words fell flat. No one believed him anymore. Elena's eyes locked on his, steady and fierce. You left me on the street, Marcus, but I rose, and I will keep rising, for myself, for my child, and tonight everyone will finally see you for what you are. The crowd thundered with applause. Marcus stood frozen, his carefully crafted image crumbling around him. Vanessa, sensing the shift, quietly slipped her arm away from his. The cameras captured it all. The downfall of the millionaire who thought himself untouchable. Undone not by rivals or markets, but by the woman he discarded. By the end of the night, Marcus's investors announced their withdrawal. His project collapsed within days. Lawsuits followed, the evidence Elena revealed tearing through his empire like wildfire. Elena, however, emerged stronger than ever. With Gabriel's help, she reclaimed her rightful assets, securing a future not just for herself, but for her child. She didn't need Marcus's wealth. She had her own. She didn't need his name. Her own was enough. And when her baby was born weeks later, healthy and strong, she held the child close and whispered, "We made it. We're free." Her journey had not been easy. She had been humiliated, abandoned, broken. But she rose, stronger than before, proving that fate always finds its way back to those who suffer unjustly. And as Marcus watched from the shadows of his crumbling empire, he finally understood. The woman he left in the street had become the storm that destroyed him. So my wonderful friends, here we are at the end of this story. If you've stayed with me until now, it must mean something touched your heart along the way. Elena's journey is more than just drama. It is a reminder for all of us. Life will betray us, break us, humiliate us, but as the Stoics taught, it's not what happens to you, it's how you respond that defines your destiny. Marcus chose arrogance and cruelty. Elena chose resilience and faith. Seneca once wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." And isn't that what we saw? A woman once abandoned in the street rose again, not only to protect her child, but to rebuild her dignity, to claim her rightful place in the world. Maybe you too are facing a storm right now, loss, betrayal, loneliness. Let Elena's story remind you that storms don't last forever. Pain is real, but so is healing. And when you choose courage over despair, you rise higher than those who tried to bury you. Marcus thought he had the final word, but fate always delivers justice in its own time. So I ask you, my dear friends, what storm are you walking through? And can you see the seed of strength that is planting inside you? If this story moved you, if it gave you even a little hope, then do me this favor. Like this video, share it with someone who might need encouragement, and subscribe to our channel so we can keep walking these journeys together. Because none of us are truly alone. And as Elena proved, even from the darkest nights, we can rise again.